neuroplasticity. Look at that, I told you, about 5 slides. So we'll finish this up in about 3 weeks. So, today we're going to talk about neuroplasticity and aggression. That's going to be exciting. How many of you think you have plastic brains? Yeah, Dina, thank you. Awesome, you're right on it. And I mean plastic, not in the toy plastic sense. Some of you probably have a plastic brain at home. I have one that's like this big. It's got color coded. It's kind of nice. I mean plastic in the sense that it can change, right? So your brain can change things, right? You can change sort of the inside, the way the synapses are weighted, some of the structure, things like that. That's really important for you. If that could not happen, guess what, Brooke? You would never learn to come to class. You'd never learn about what's in class. You would just have whatever you had kind of hardwired when you were born, and then you're not going to be able to learn anything new, right? Now, there are some species that are much farther over on the, we can't learn anything side of things than humans, right? Humans, we actually have, for better or worse, we have the ability to learn things. Okay, and there's this really interesting debate we could have, Haley, about why we can learn things versus having instincts, right? It's all about how stable is your environment over your lifetime and over the lifetime of your species, and there are these competing forces, and that's a really exciting conversation that really doesn't fit into this class, but you can think about that and debate it amongst your literary circles that you float around in. Anybody have one of those? No. That's the problem. You need a circle of other weirdos for you to hang around so you can listen to their weird things, and then they listen to your weird thing, and then you all move forward together in a weird circle. I know that sounded a little awkward, but there you go. If you add a couple more, you can make a weird ellipse. Actually, a circle is a weird ellipse, but that's a whole geometry joke. So, introduction. What are we going to talk about? Aggressive behavior is not hardwired, right? So let's, at least in humans and mammals, we want to go with this story, right? Who remembers those crustaceans? Jessica, that was a brilliant lecture, wasn't it? I mean, urine coming out of eyes. I mean, you're not going to get that in another class. On this whole campus, no one else is going to talk to you about urine coming out of eyes. I promise you. So think about that experience. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to hear that. But aggressive behavior is not hardwired, right? This is not something that you have just instinctually, right? We're not like crustaceans. Crustaceans sort of have those escape and attack circuits, right? And maybe you could make the argument, AJ, that those are sort of hardwired circuits. But humans and mammals, we're dealing with something different, right? We're dealing with something that is much more flexible. It's going to be based on our environment, right? So I think we've all participated in, or at least observed, an aggressive encounter, right? I mean, I don't think that's, unfortunately, that's not an atypical situation for most folks. Even if it was that time you were 6 and someone took the red Power Ranger from you, and that's the one you really wanted, and they tried to use, I don't even know what are they called, blue Power Ranger. Is that even a Power Ranger? It is. Abigail's agreeing with me, that's a Power Ranger. And they tried to make you be the blue Power Ranger, and you're like, no, that's not happening. I'm the red Power Ranger because I said so. And so you have this aggressive encounter, right, between you and it's probably one of your cousins, right, Chelsea, who always thought they should be the red Power Ranger, but you decided you should be instead. I don't know, were you into Power Rangers? I didn't think so. Battleborgs. What was that? Was that Beetleborgs? What was the other? Nobody knows. These odd things hop up on my Netflix queue sometimes, and I'm like, why would I want to watch that? And then I remember that weird thing I watched once that I gave a thumbs up to, and I'm like, oh, that's why. So that's why it's giving me that. Brad, you should do a study based on the algorithm that Netflix uses to suggest things you should watch. about what that personality type is for that person. You should think about that.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
It is, right? So this is not hardwired. We have to learn this stuff, right? We have to learn how to be, not how to be aggressive, or that we should be aggressive, but we learn the specific sort of behaviors that we're going to perform that might be successful in different contexts, right? So if you think about this, what's one of the first things you should always do if there's the potential for an aggressive encounter? You have to figure out if you're bigger than the other person. That's always step one, right? Am I bigger than the other person? Who remembers RHP? Resource holding power, right? Okay. You have to evaluate resource holding power. So you have to know, am I bigger, stronger, faster than this other individual, and can I win an encounter if that comes to that? The second thing you have to be able to evaluate is RV. That's the resource value, right? Like, is it really even worth my time to try to defend whatever resource it is that I have? Okay, and so you're going to have to evaluate those two things. And in certain situations, you're going to decide an aggressive encounter works. In certain situations, you're going to decide that's not going to work, right? Anybody here an athlete? Anybody here play? I'm going to pick two sports, right? Bree, you're wanting to tell me you're an athlete for some reason.
No.
You're not wanting to tell me that? Are you an athlete?
Yeah.
Okay, but you didn't want to tell me. That's okay. What sport is it?
I run track.
You run track. Okay, that's not going to be as helpful. Because you're not allowed to punch people in track, right?
I mean, you can.
You can. You can. You know what I've noticed in track lately? Because I've noticed folks who run track are getting much more muscular, right? Have you noticed, especially in the men's, like the men who run track, like especially the USA men's track team? Like, I've been watching this for, like, I don't know, 2 decades, let's say, and I've noticed like how massive some of those guys are getting compared to like when they used to be like just super thin, right? It's like a different sort of thing. That's not going to help me. I apologize. But let's imagine instead you're a wrestler. Okay, so you're going to be a wrestler, Greco-Roman, not WWE. So I just want to clarify that, right? Depending on like the skill set of the other individual, you may try different approaches, right? You may try to pin that person, you may try to flip them, or you may try to use some kind of different leverage, depending on, you know, I mean, it's all by weight class, but depending on your size versus the other person's size, right? How many of you are really into sumo wrestling? Yeah, right? It's actually pretty exciting. So I read this really awesome article. You guys know Nate Silver? He's got this group called 538. Brad, relax. You look a little upset at Nate Silver for some reason.
No.
You're not?
No.
Okay. So this guy's got this group called 538. They do, except this last go around, they were extremely accurate at predicting political races. Even, I mean, I'm just talking like major races, but even kind of down a rung, he was like really great at this, right? Last time he sort of botched a couple because he bet all his money on somebody else, but whatever there, right? His group also does sports, and they wrote this, one guy that wrote this really, it was like a really long article, and I probably spent like an hour on it, Dina, and maybe I shouldn't have. It was about sumo wrestling. And you're going to think, like, why would I read this hour-long article on sumo wrestling? The point was, Bree, they were trying to compare sumo wrestlers today to sumo wrestlers in the 1700s, right? Because sumo wrestling has been going on for centuries in Japan, right? I mean, it's just this long thing. And so if you start to think about this, like if you were to compare, like who's a big track star now, like Usain Bolt, right? And if you were to try to compare him to a major track star 50 years ago even, right? Okay, if you were to try to do that, that would be hard to compare, like who's better, right? Because the training has changed, the technology has changed. If you think about the shoes and the uniforms, if you think about the track surfaces have changed, right? So all of these things have changed. So it's really hard to make comparisons, okay, from previous eras, right? But sumo wrestling has not changed at all in the last millennia, right? And surprisingly, they have detailed records going all the way back to like the 1600s of these bouts, right? Which is actually pretty impressive. So the question was, is it better to be like faster, or is it better to be bigger as a sumo wrestler, right? And what do you want to do? Do you want to use like leverage to try to push someone over, right? Or do you want to try to like pin someone and like actually use some physical strength, right? This is kind of an interesting debate. But I think it just highlights that this aggressive behavior, depending on the context, depending on your evaluation of your opponent, maybe if you're facing a taller sumo wrestler or a shorter sumo wrestler, you're going to use a different strategy to try to win that bout, right? I used to watch a lot of sumo wrestling. Used to come on back before ESPN, when they showed actual sports, and they didn't just show you people talking about sports all the time. You could actually watch those things. It was kind of exciting. So it's not hardwired. It is something based on previous experience and your environment and your context that are going to change your behavior. It has to be adaptive. If aggressive behavior is not adaptive, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't continue to do it. And the first time that you participate in an aggressive encounter and you do something wrong, like fatally wrong, guess what? You don't get an opportunity to try something again. Okay? Right, Dina? I mean, that's the way it works. So you have to actually be able to be adaptive. Again, it is altered by your environment and your experience. Folks who win aggressive encounters, they approach future aggressive encounters differently than individuals who lose aggressive encounters. Then they have sort of a different approach, right? Folks who win aggressive encounters, guess what they'll try to do? They'll try to go for another aggressive encounter, right? Well, I won that last time. I'll give it a try again. But Kate, individuals who lose, they're going to try a different strategy, right? So instead of the sort of like, I'm going to run out and just knock this sumo wrestler over, that's never worked for me in the past. But what might work instead is if I sort of get the guy off balance and then he falls over, right? So I'm going to try that strategy instead, a more circumspect approach. Now the real question is, what does this do to your brain? Does it do anything to your brain? Here's like a real spoiler alert. It does stuff to your brain, right? And that's why we're having this whole. The lecture doesn't end after this slide, so there's stuff I'm going to tell you. One thing we want to think about is serotonin. I don't know if you guys remember, like basically everything else I've said this whole semester so far has been about serotonin, right? So Lily, don't forget about that. As a heads up for that exam next week, there are going to be questions about serotonin. I know nobody was like thinking that was going to be there, but it is. So serotonin levels, we're going to think about how those can be altered. Not a big deal. But what I really want to talk about today is this guy called vasopressin. How many of you have heard of vasopressin? Yeah. What's it good for, Dina?
Regulating your vein.
Yeah. Vascular pressure, right? It's right in the name. We didn't get very creative there. It's like, it does something with pressure in your vascular system. Let's call it vasopressin. That seems to make some sense. It's also related to aggressive behavior in your brain, right? And if you increase vasopressin levels, you're actually going to increase aggressive behavior. You can increase vasopressin in a variety of ways. One is just squirt vasopressin in your brain. Anyway, that seems like a good approach, right? You should do this before you go out for a bout, right? It's like, it's like a vasopressin pill.
Yeah, we'll just stick it in there.
Yeah, right?
Good.
That'd be, have a little cartridge.
Yes.
It's like twist in a vial. It's like a film canister. I don't know.
So are people with high blood pressure more aggressive?
Brad, why did you laugh at that? I think people who are aggressive have high blood pressure. I don't know which is. I don't know. When I get aggressive, my blood pressure goes up. trying to think about how often my blood pressure is elevated. I think it's all the time. I'm going to use it for something one day that's going to be helpful. So, I don't think people with, I don't know that anybody's like looked at people just with like chronic high blood pressure to see if they're more aggressive. I think, if you are upset and aggressive, then your blood pressure is going to be elevated for a variety of reasons. That's a good thing, usually, right? If you're trying to be aggressive because you're fighting off a grizzly bear, you want your blood pressure to be up a little bit to deliver oxygen and other things, because I'm assuming you're going to like be bitten and you need some white blood cells there, right, to kind of fight off potential infections and so forth. So there you go. But if we increase vasopressin, we can increase aggressive behavior. There are a number of studies that have done this in mammals, mice, voles. Who loves voles? Those are fun. They're little like rodent guys, right? Okay. If you squirt vasopressin or vasopressin agonists into various parts of their brain, including the hypothalamus and the amygdala, they will increase their aggressive behavior. This even works in like castrated hamsters. I know, like nobody's like who's ready for the castrated hamster lecture. Nobody was ready for that one, right? Jessica was. She's like, "Oh yeah, I was."
It was in the book.
It was in the book, yeah. So we were going to talk about it, right? I mean, what does castrating a hamster accomplish? Well, it prevents you from getting other hamsters. So if you kind of want to put a limit on the hamster population, that's one way to do it. The other thing it does is it prevents testosterone, right? So it's going to drastically reduce testosterone production. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about testosterone today. We're going to talk about it briefly. That's sort of going to be the subject of the next set of chapters. We'll talk about hormones more than we have. But testosterone increases aggressive behavior, just to give you a heads up, right? That's why males of most species are more aggressive than females of most species, right? I think that's a fairly straightforward analysis, right? So that's why they did it in castrated hamsters. They want to figure out, like, is it, you want to make sure it's not a result of the testosterone and it's actually just a result of the vasopressin. So I draw so many arrows. I have great hearing too, by the way. Surprisingly great hearing. I draw arrows so that you guys follow along and stay focused. See, every time I do this, you think it's going to be something important, and I'm really just trying to bring your attention away from Angry Birds. I know that's where it's going to go, or Candy Crush, or what's the latest thing you're wasting your time on, Brad?
I play this game called Two Dots.
Two Dots.
It's like Connect 4.
There you go, right? Anybody else play Two Dots?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I got bored.
You got bored with it.
Yeah, me too.
I played this game called Two Dots once, and that was my paycheck when I just played video games. Just 2 dots. Now it's like 2 dots with a 1 in the front. It's not much more now that I quit playing video games. I know that was a good story for you. Keep living in your parents' basement and playing video games as long as you can. 2 dots. That's the most uncreative name for anything I've ever heard.
And you don't want to connect 2 dots either. You want to connect as many as possible and make squares.
Right. So it should actually be like mini dots.
That's confusing though.
Multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple dots is
All
better.
the dots.
All the dots?
Every dot.
But then if you know all these people named Dorothy, that's going to get confusing too. For those of you who don't realize, Dot is short for Dorothy. I mean, I know that's kind of like a shocker to people. We'll name a lot of people Dorothy anymore. Since we lost that one in the tornado in Kansas.
It's cursed.
Huh?
It's cursed now.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so we're going to, she made it home. It was just a head injury. She's probably got CTE now.
That house fell on her.
We'll give you a concussion. So aggressive behavior is going to increase. We can squirt this in a variety of places in the brain, right? So it doesn't, it does sort of matter, but hypothalamus, amygdala, both of these will increase aggressive behavior. There's this really cool story about cross-fostering with mice, right? So I need to tell you what a cross-fostering experiment is, because these are kind of interesting and they're used a lot. So what you can do is you can do it with two different species, you can do it with two different environments, you can do it with two sort of genetic lines of a single species. What you will do is take offspring, some offspring, from one mother and switch them with offspring from another mother. Okay? Now, Katie, this doesn't do a lot of good if it's both the same species, if they're very genetically similar, if they're living in the same environment, if you're going to give them the same conditions, right? But if, for example, you wanted to see the role between genetics, like genetics and environment, right? These kind of interactions, and you wanted to look at, is food play a role in certain kinds of development? Does the enrichment activities, does that develop, maybe you take some mice that are bred to be smart mice, and then you take some mice that are bred to not be so smart mice, and then you cross-foster those, right? You take the smart babies and put them with the not-so-smart parents, and then see if it's genetics or environment or what, right? So you can do these things. In this particular study, they took two kinds of mice. They took one that was more aggressive than the other, right? So there are two species of mice. And they took some mice pups from one mother and put them over with another mother, and then they did the same thing. And yeah, Haley, I'm just drawing extra arrows now, so that they can switch those, right? So they're switching some offspring. What was really interesting about this is they found that the mice that were raised with the less aggressive parents, even if they were from the more aggressive species, were actually less aggressive than their sort of counterparts, right, from that same species. So their environment affected their aggressive behavior. So that's kind of interesting, right? On the surface, like, well, you can take this aggressive species of mice, but if you give them, pacifistic parents, then they will, grow up to be sort of, I don't know, nice, calm mice, right? Okay, they're not going to be angry mice. But Dina, that doesn't really tell us much, right? Okay, if you were raised by, angry parents, you're probably going to be an angry person, right? That's just the way that works. If you were raised by parents who are super calm, then you just might grow up to be a super calm person, right? If you get one of each, then you just have these violent outbursts periodically. I don't know if anybody else is in that group, right? You got one parent who's falls asleep talking to you. He's so calm, which is worrisome when he's driving. Just you got hey, Dad, you awake? Just got pump him full of caffeine. Still doesn't make a difference. He'll still fall asleep. And then you've got another parent who's constantly worked up about something. I don't know, right, what that does for you. But with these mice, so we're going to do this, right? We're going to do this cross-fostering experiment. And we found that, well, having calm parents, having less aggressive parents, means that the mice, the baby mice, are less aggressive, right? They're not going to be biting each other as much. They're not going to be, I don't know, what else kind of aggressive things the mice do to each other. Mostly bite, scratch. That's kind of the mouse repertoire there. There's not a lot else they can do, right? So they're going to be less likely to be aggressive. But we want to know why are they less aggressive? Is it purely a behavioral aspect, like they just learned this behavior? Or has that learning actually influenced something in their brains? And what's actually super cool about this is those mice that are less aggressive, they also had reduced vasopressin staining. So when we would we were to cut open we have to cut open their brains, and we're going to make little slices. And then we're going to check those slices for cells that express vasopressin, right? They will have a reduced amount of vasopressin in their brains, or a reduced amount of cells that would express vasopressin, as compared to their sort of non-cross-fostered litter mates. So, having calm parents actually changed their brain chemistry and so forth, right? And so it reduced the amount of vasopressin cells. So that's pretty cool, right? How many of you would like to go back in time and cross-foster yourself with someone else's parents? Man, it's like, well, I'll just try it now. Forget going back in time.
Although sometimes I've wondered.
I know, right? Like, if that didn't happen to you. You ever, so, I don't know. People tell me all the time, like, oh, you're a smart person, you should have kids to have more smart people. And it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way, and my main rebuttal to them is, have you met my parents? And then you would go, I don't think you should chance it. Actually, my parents are pretty good. They don't bother me. And they haven't.
What about your wife's parents?
They don't live in this state. I mean, my parents don't either. But they live farther away. Deliberately.
So in other words, your kids possibly get their genes.
That's why we're not having kids. I mean, that's not the only reason. I also like having a bank account with positive numbers in it.
And a clean house.
Clean house. Yeah. That's nice. And I like to do what I want with my time. Not like have to feed someone else. And the feeding part's not so bad. It's the part like after the feeding, right? So like about 24 hours after you feed someone something, right? There's like a second thing you got to do with that same matter that you put into them. It's going to come back out. That's the part I'm not too thrilled about. So there you go. And I'm never going to make enough money to have like a full-time nanny to like take care of all of that, right? So there you go, Katie. I have a nephew. He's 10. Perfect age to take to like kids movies I want to see. You know, so I don't look like the creepy guy in the back. But at the same time, he can just go home when there's a problem. So it's like, I'm done with you for the day. It's like, well, those Legos were cool. I think I'm gonna go to like something else now. Bye. I didn't have to pay for the Legos. Those things are expensive. Anybody bought Legos recently? Yeah. They're like the price of a kidney. No, he got the Millennium Falcon for Christmas. That was pretty cool. Took him till New Year's to put it together. All right, so cross-fostering, decrease aggression because they're raised by these less aggressive parents, but it's actually going to have an effect on their brains because their brains are going to produce less vasopressin, right? Who thinks that's exciting? That's actually pretty cool, right? Look at this, only 2 points on this slide. It's about interactions. Huh?
Let's see how many arrows you can throw.
Yeah, probably a lot. Look at all this white space over here. It's all aerospace. Who remembers serotonin?
What's serotonin?
Great. Increasing serotonin levels does what to your aggression? Yeah, it lowers it, right, Brooke? It just reduces it, okay? So we're going to jack up serotonin, and you're just going to, like, sit down with some popcorn and, I don't know, watch the latest episodes of Downton Abbey or something. Anybody watch that show? Somebody I thought we did. You watching Victoria these days?
I used to watch it because my mom watched it and I didn't really have a choice.
My wife's really into Victoria lately. Anybody else watch that?
My roommates watch it.
Yeah, I don't know. She watches all those like those shows where people wear like clothes. Those like period pieces, you know, as opposed, I guess, to the shows I watch. Sounded a little odd. I don't know. She's really into these like period pieces, right? So She really loved Downton Abbey. She liked Victoria. I don't know. I go home and there's like something on. I'm like, what's this show? It looks like this other show I watched. It's like even has the same people in it, but they're doing different things. The Forsyte Saga. Did anybody watch that one? That was boring. I don't know. All the same. Serotonin is going to reduce aggression. We already said vasopressin is going to increase aggression, right? So these guys are working in opposite directions. So that's interesting, right? I mean, it makes sense though. Chelsea, you're going to want a molecule that's going to increase aggression and one that's going to be able to decrease it. You want to be able to kind of modulate this level up and down, right? You don't just always want, yeah, aggression, or always like, no, never, right? I mean, that doesn't work that way. One of the places where these guys really interact is the anterior hypothalamus. So anterior means like the front part, right? And the hypothalamus is really responsible for releasing a lot of hormones, and it's really responsible for the control of the release of most of the hormones in your body, in fact. So these two guys overlap a lot in the anterior hypothalamus, which is sort of super interesting, actually, that increasing vasopressin and increasing serotonin might, have two different effects, and we're going to do that in the anterior hypothalamus. So, this same region, these are cells that make a lot of vasopressin. So these are going to be vasopressin-producing cells in the anterior hypothalamus. They have a lot of receptors for serotonin. Okay, so we're able to use serotonin to sort of turn off those vasopressin cells. Okay, so we're going to be able to kind of turn off vasopressin production so that we can decrease our aggression when need be. All right. Anybody have any questions about that?
So again, the vasopressin cells have serotonin receptors?
Yeah, they'll have a lot of receptors for serotonin, so you have your serotonin combined with your vasopressin cells. I can shut those guys down, which is going to decrease your aggressive behavior. So there you go.
But it doesn't work the other way around, right? Like, vasopressin doesn't reduce serotonin.
Right. That is correct. That's why we don't, I'm trying to think if they're like vasopressin antagonists or other. Typically, if you're dealing with aggression, you're going to give someone a serotonin agonist. Right? You're going to give them something that's going to increase serotonin levels. All right, we should also think about steroid hormones. Okay. Sort of the main steroid hormone, we're going to talk about this briefly, is testosterone. Again, we'll talk a lot about testosterone as we move through the rest of the semester. If you have an increase in testosterone, you also have an increase in vasopressin reactive cell producing cells, right? So males, at least in mammals, and I guess it's important that we say we're sort of dealing exclusively in mammals here, right? Males in most mammalian species will have, of course, they'll have higher testosterone levels than females, but they'll also have higher counts of vasopressin producing cells. Which again, this kind of goes hand in hand, right? I mean, if you're going to say, well, high testosterone is going to be increasing aggression, then you would think, well, that would go with your vasopressin. If I just told you the story, more vasopressin is more aggression. This works really well in things like mice and cats and hamsters. The relationship is a little less powerful in humans. Okay. So if we were to draw this scale, and on one end we were to put sort of like instinct, and on this other end we were going to put learning, right? And if we were to draw, like, kind of plot out on this continuum where are certain animals, right? So we might want to put like crayfish down there, right? We're going to give them a C. And maybe we want to put, I'm going to give an MI, that's mice. I like mice and rats. I guess I should do an R for rodents. And then if you come over this way a little bit, then you probably have, let's do like MO for monkeys, right? Okay, so and then if you go over a little bit more, I'm not going to put us all over here, Brad, because there's no way that, right? Because we have some, and I might even argue that we should kind of shift all of these guys down this way just a little bit. But then we could probably put an H for hippopotamuses, and we could put an H for humans, right? And the farther we are over toward like learning playing a bigger role in our behavior, the smaller the role that's going to be played by any particular molecule, right? And so if you take a rat and you shoot it up with a lot of testosterone, it's probably going to get pretty aggressive. And it's going to get aggressive fairly quickly, assuming it's a male rat, right? And it has male rat brain parts, and that's important because male and female brains are different, right? And they have different structures. Well, their structures are different in their size and in the roles that they play sometimes, right? And that makes sense because males and females have different kinds of behaviors they can do and different things that happen, right? So, I don't know, I don't want to give the fifth grade talk, right, that you probably all had, hopefully you all had. I'm going to take a wild guess that some of your parents decided you didn't need that talk, right, because you were never going to have sex, and so there was no point them ever teaching you about it. Because there's a surprisingly high number of people who fall in that category, right? True story. I don't know that it was you, but you don't have to admit to this. That's why in Arkansas, so do you know Arkansas has the highest teen pregnancy rate in the nation? Yeah, and it's not, so when I say Arkansas and teen pregnancy, you're thinking about these 13-year-olds shooting out babies, right? It's really 18 and 19-year-olds. I know, right? And so guess what you do if you go to college in Arkansas? You take a class on how not to get pregnant. I'm just waiting on them to offer that class here. I'm going to sign up to teach it. Here's how, don't do it. Because I think it's going to be effective, right? But true story. All public institutions in Arkansas require you to take a class as a freshman on how not to get pregnant. What do you think about that, Brad?
You don't want to know.
I don't want to know. I think it's brilliant. It's too bad it's only in one state.
I think that should start in elementary school, so.
I know, right? Hey, if you've got the parts, you should know what they do. Right?
For some reason, that's pretty radical to people.
Yeah. You don't give people a car and then go, 10 years later, I'm going to tell you what to do with it. Because you know what they're going to do for 10 years? Run into trees. No, seriously, right? If I gave you a car and I didn't tell you how to drive it, what would you do with it? You'd drive it into a tree.
I can keep giving people standards and telling them to drive it.
Yeah. Sparks are going to fly. And that happens. And so, sparks, metaphorically, are things like, sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies. Those are the sparks of not knowing what your sexual parts do. Right? Here you go. Testosterone up, vasopressin out, you're going to be aggressive. In humans, again, that relationship, if you inject yourself with a lot of testosterone, it's not instantly going to make you aggressive, right? It's not as tight of a relationship. There are other sort of neural processes going on, right? That are going to keep that from happening. Although on average, individuals with higher testosterone levels are going to be more aggressive. So that's kind of cool. I'm deciding whether or not I should tell you about rat uteruses. I don't think I will. I'm going to eventually, but I think that's more of a testosterone story about rat uteruses, and I don't know that right now is the time to tell you. Because then we could talk about twin studies, and if anybody has a twin. Anybody have a twin? Nobody wants to admit to that now, right? 'Cause you don't know what I'm going to say next. Actually, females who have male twins, like a male twin, right? Like, so they have a twin brother. Like, if you're a female, you're actually slightly more aggressive than females who, like, were in the womb by themselves or had a female share the uterus with them.
What about the male twin? Is he less aggressive?
The testosterone level's already kind of maxed out, so there's not typically an increase.
Is that regardless of whether they're separated or not?
Yeah. Yeah, it has to do with what's called prenatal androgenization. So it's about the testosterone present in the uterus. It happens in rats more often than in humans because rats have multiple pups that are males or females. Most of the time people don't have pups. Most of the time, Jonna, they don't have multiple births, right? Most people, how many of you in this room were a single birth? Yeah, it's probably everybody who said they didn't have a twin. You were a single birth, okay? Just heads up on that in case you didn't realize what that meant. All right, so that's fun. Hey, who loves anabolic steroids? Nobody's gonna raise their hand. I can tell who's on them and not, Brad.
Yeah.
You can. It's pretty obvious, right? You can tell. Again, I don't think we have any bodybuilders in this class. Right? You guys watch those shows, those documentaries with the guys on steroids? I watched them. They're interesting. Right? What was the one with the Bigger, Faster, Stronger? Did anybody watch that one? It's a pretty good documentary. Really embarrassed me because anybody from California? No, that's great. You know Congressman Waxman from California? So he's a Democratic congressman from California. He did not realize you had to be 21 years old to buy alcohol, which was this really awkward moment in the documentary that really was embarrassing to me. For him, because he had to ask one of his staffers, like, how old do you have to be to buy alcohol? In his defense, he's super old, and nobody's been carding him for decades, but beside the point. So, anabolic steroids. Anybody ever used, nobody's going to answer that, right? Who's been on the juice lately? No, nobody. It's like, oh yeah. Do they check you for steroids at the, what is it, a locker room? The bout?
About
Pre-bout doctors come by and take blood samples or urine samples?
higher level games, yeah.
You think so? Bree, as a collegiate athlete, I think you probably have to go through, you may or may not, right? But they'll test some athletes periodically, right? If they're using performance-enhancing drugs. Okay, so stay off steroids. You try. And it's a battle sometimes, isn't it? Because you're like walking down the street and there all the time these people are like, you can run so much faster. Rub this on your legs. And then you kind of go like, I don't know, man, that guy's like in a creepy van. I don't know if I should trust that, but yeah. So try to stay off steroids. That's better for your long-term career because they'll kick you out, right? They did that to people. They do it to people all the time. What's interesting about steroids, actually, anabolic steroids, and that's kind of different than like other steroids, right? So how many of you have known someone, you don't have to admit to this because again this is like personally identifiable medical information, have been on steroids because you have like asthma, right? Okay, that's a different, Amanda, that's a completely different kind of thing, right? To be on steroids for that, right? So those are sort of different. Prednisone, right? And that's a pretty common steroid that folks will take. Not to get huge in the gym, but for like medical purposes.
And that makes you eat like a cow.
Yeah, it does. that it does. It makes people really hungry and they eat all the time. What's actually really interesting about anabolic steroids is it will decrease 5-HT receptor activity, right? It'll actually interfere with your ability to have serotonin bind to receptors, which will, hey, guess what? Increase aggression, right? That's kind of interesting. Who asked about roid rage the other day? Was that you?
There's a girl that's on here.
Oh, yeah, Lauren's not here.
Oh, too bad for her. Because we'll talk a little, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? I mean, if you're taking a lot of anabolic steroids and you're altering your serotonin receptor activity, then you're going to be a little more aggressive. So you got to worry about that too. You're going to lose that nice, calm personality that you have. So Bree, please, for the sake of all of us in this class, we don't want you to have roid rage. Stay off the clear and the cream. Hey, who knows about glucocorticoids? Yeah, what are these guys? These are stress hormones, right? How many of you have ever been stressed? How many of you think you'll be stressed exactly 1 week from now? Because you'll have had your exam for 53 minutes, and for the last 50 minutes you'll realize you don't know anything. For the first 3 minutes, you'll think you know something.
It would just be in denial.
Yeah, I think so. Please, if you don't know anything on the exam, just leave it blank. It'll save you time. Seriously. It'll save you time. You can leave and do whatever it is you wanted to do in the first place, sooner. Or you could study and make me sit here for 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's up to you. What's really kind of interesting about this, you would imagine, like how many of you have ever been stressed, and you've been stressed in a situation where you had to be aggressive, right? That happens. What's kind of interesting here, though, is folks who have a high lifetime history of aggression, right? So let's say chronic violent offenders, right? So criminal folks who have committed violent crimes, they actually have extremely low levels of glucocorticoids. They're not really stressed out about that at all. Which is sort of interesting, right? I mean, if you're thinking about this, like, yeah, I did a bunch of violent crime, whatever. I went around and kicked old ladies. Didn't bother me any. I was just trying to think of a violent crime there, kicking old ladies. I think that's illegal, right? I mean, I guess unless the old lady signed a release form, right? I mean,
If they file charges, it's illegal.
only if they file charges, right? Otherwise, if they're just like, and just yell at you, then you're fine.
So is that why these criminals will just keep going back and keep going back?
They're not getting stressed about it.
Yeah, so they don't care. So they just keep doing it.
Why would you care?
Yeah.
You're not getting stressed out about it. I mean, you're really not.
Yeah.
On top of that, if you're continually doing things that are aggressive and you're getting away with it, it's working. Remember that time I said, hey, the people who are aggressive and they win, they'll just keep doing it. Right? So
That was the dopamine thing, is a reinforcer, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because you're gonna have some dopamine release related to this too. If you beat somebody up, I don't know, you guys probably go around beating people up all the time. Last time you beat someone up, that felt pretty good. Right? So think about that, right? I mean, the last time you what do you do hip checks, and last time you did a really good hip check and you knocked someone into the audience, does that ever happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you did that. How'd that feel?
Felt pretty good.
Yeah, it did, right? Anybody listen to this? He's this violent, aggressive individual. No, it's perfectly normal. You got a little spike in dopamine. So guess what you're going to do next time? Try it again. Worked last time.
Yeah.
Wow, made me feel good. Watch this. So there you go, right? It's just reinforcing. The other thing that glucocorticoids will do is they'll actually inhibit vasopressin gene expression. So there you go. We have to have genes to make vasopressin. It's a protein, right? Whatever. If you have a lot of glucocorticoids, you're actually going to stop making or stop expressing those genes, which will reduce vasopressin, which will do what? Reduce aggression, right? So there you go. Don't get stressed, and you can stay aggressive. That's why, as faculty, we work really hard to stress out our students. so you guys aren't aggressive. Right? So we really try to do that.
It's working.
It is working, right? It's a safety measure. It's a safety measure on our part. They wouldn't put in windows that open for us with fire escape ladders, so we have to find a different way. Questions about that? That's not so bad, right? Go ahead, Brad.
So, I'm confused about like the relationship of like, so stress leads to more inhibition of this, which leads to less. But I feel like that's like goes against what you'd learn in like criminal psychopathology, like and
Those
ACE.
guys are wrong.
Okay.
No,
I just don't know how like adverse childhood,
Yeah,
experience and stuff
sure.
would play into.
Absolutely, and I think that's a different. We'll talk about developmental effects. So, this is in adults, right? So that's important. How this happens during development.
So it's sort of like learned helplessness in adulthood instead of like long term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
That makes sense.
which are slightly different things, right? And so the other thing to keep in mind is aggression in humans is going to be a very complicated story, right? It's going to be less complicated in other species. That's why that relationship between testosterone and aggressive behavior in rats, for example, I mean, it's tight, right? It's a very high positive correlation. The relationship between aggression and testosterone in humans is not as high, right? It's there, but it's not as high because there are other factors that are going to contribute. And you're absolutely right, our environment plays a much bigger role in our development, and we have a much longer development, right, for things to happen. So, but we'll talk about developmental influences at some future point. You're going to get excited about that, aren't you? I'll even bring in a guest speaker. No, I won't, but I tell you that anyway. All right, any other questions about this? All right.